Hello and welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Erik. I did 11 years in prison. I talk about prison stuff. Today I'm continuing my story in El Dorado, and the best way I can do that is by talking about the different jobs I had. Because there's not really a lot to break up the monotony while you're in prison. You know, you have routines. That's kind of what defines your time, is your routine. You know, do you get up every morning and go to the weight pit? Do you go to the library? Do you go to work? If so, you know, what's your job? So the best way I can tell this story is about different occupations I had, because realistically, college and work and the JCs consumed a lot of my time. In the last video that I did on this, I kind of talked about the JCs. So yeah, we're going to get into this. Subscribe if you want to. Please leave me a like if you like the video. And here we go. So I talked in my previous video where I was talking about my story about the JCs. It was a nonprofit organization. We did a lot of good stuff. We taught classes and things like that. But that's not the only thing I did with my time in El Dorado. You know, I was going to college, I was studying theology, and then later I was studying religious education. And I also had a job. I was working as an electrician within the facility. I was on the electric crew. So, you know, that took up a lot of time. You know, it was never a set thing on when I would go to work. There were two electric crews in the prison. There was an electric crew that did your basic maintenance. You know, they would go to cells here and there, and they would replace receptacles. They would change light bulbs, stuff like that. Not a lot of real big stuff. And then they had another electrical crew, the one that I was on. And we handled most of the big projects. If there was new construction, we did that. If, you know, like we built a church, our crew did most of the electrical in that church. It's mostly done by two guys. There were other people who worked on the project, of course, but a lot of those guys were minimum, and they would come and go, and, you know, they weren't steady on the project, and some of them had no idea what they were doing, and, you know, we had to go back and redo all of their stuff. But it was never really set in stone on what time we went to work. We worked, you know, Monday through, I want to say we worked Monday through Friday, although sometimes it might have been Monday through Thursday. But yeah, it was Monday through Friday most of the time. When we got called to work, a lot of work details had a specific time that they had to be at work. But for me and my cellmate, Kevin, he also worked the same job. It was a matter of when our boss came in the fence, because there were different projects around the prison to work. You know, he might have had something outside the fences going on, and we didn't go outside the fences. So if he had something out back in the shop that he was working on, we would wait until he came in before we went to work. It could be anywhere from 7 o'clock in the morning till, you know, 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes he didn't call us out until 12:30 in the afternoon. So there was a big inconsistency on when we went to work, and I didn't really like that much. But the nice thing was, if he didn't call us out early, if it was 9 o'clock or maybe sometime in the afternoon before he called us to work, the nice thing about that was I could get some college work done before I went to work. I could also get a workout in before I went to work. That was really nice. So when we went to work, we would take coffee with us, and that was allowed. Sometimes we would bring some, you know, candy or something. We were allowed to carry stuff like that, snacks in our pocket, as long as it was consistent with the general orders at the facility or the IMPPs. So we would grab our stuff for work, and we would head out. Usually, we didn't really know where we were going to meet our boss. Sometimes when they called us out to work, they would tell us, hey, you need to go meet your boss at such and such location. A lot of times we would have to check with the floor officer before we left to figure out where he was. Sometimes they might have to call him on the radio or something like that. But we would meet him where he was. Sometimes we would have to go get tools and equipment, and we would figure out what projects we were working on that day. many times we would be changing exterior lights. Prisons are very well lit up. So you have these big high masts out on the yard, and those light bulbs have to be changed. You have big lights on the sides of the cell houses. Those need to be changed. So it could be changing a light bulb. It could be changing the whole light. It might be changing ballast. But sometimes if there was a lot of work for the other electric crew, we would go and do his work as well. So if he was busy doing something, but there was a cell over in Supermax that needed light bulbs changed or a ballast changed or something like that, or if it was in one of the GP cell houses, we would go do that in addition to our regular stuff. We changed a lot of light bulbs. We changed a lot of ballast, but we also ran a lot of wire because we did a lot of new construction. We would run stuff for education. We would run stuff in the church. So we ran a lot of wire. We pulled a lot of wire. Sometimes we would help the IT department and we would pull cable. And a lot of that stuff can get really interesting because you think about if you're working in the cell house, day room lights. A cell house can be really tall. You might need to be up 30, 35 feet. You might have to get in a scissor lift and go all the way up to the ceiling. And sometimes being all the way up in the scissor lift isn't high enough. So you got to jump out of the basket and stand on the railing and do all sorts of shady stuff that OSHA wouldn't approve of. But, OSHA doesn't really care about what happens inside of prisons. So, we did a lot of projects aside from lights that I could tell you about, but it's kind of boring. We had to run transformers. We had to, rewire exhaust fans when they put a new roof on the place. We ran rigid conduit. Sometimes stuff had to be run in underground conduit, which was kind of a pain, but, it was filled with water and stuff. But we did all that stuff. And a lot of times it was dangerous. That prison is broken into two sides. You have the east side and the west side. The east side is mostly your standard 110 and... Well, I say 110, but, it's more like 125, but whatever. And the other side is 277 for most of your stuff. So you might be working with higher voltage. Sometimes, as an electrician, people will call you out to fix stuff in the middle of the night. If there was something wrong with a warmer over in the chow hall or something, and it was the middle of the night, they would call one of us out to go fix that. SEG elevators and SEG, they had these big elevators for lifting all the food carts to the top run, and they were electrical, and sometimes stuff would go bad on them, and you would have to go over and you'd have to try to fix those. Usually the on-call electricians did that. I wasn't an on-call electrician for very long. I didn't really enjoy it. But yeah, there was a lot of projects that we worked on. I did that for quite a while. I don't know exactly how long. I know it was quite a while. I would say years. But eventually I became eligible to enter a vocational program, which was important because that was a part of my program agreement. I had to take a VOTEC class. I ended up getting enrolled in the masonry class, and that took me away from my detail as an electrician. So I was no longer an electrician. I was listed as a student. And I took the masonry program, which was an NCC ER program. You basically had the NCC ER core curriculum, and then you had masonry level 1, and I believe there was masonry level 2. I don't quite remember at this point, but it covered a lot of stuff. You learned the basics of hand tools, power tools, all that good stuff, a bunch of safety stuff on how to lift, different hand signals for working with heavy equipment, all sorts of stuff, fall protection, you name it. It's really, really boring. I don't remember most of it, but yeah. So I did that. I learned all the intro stuff. And then after that, you actually get your hands on some tools and you start learning masonry. So I learned how to basically lay brick and block and stone, which was really cool. You learn how to use a brick hammer, how to use a maul, how to cut stuff with a wet saw, how to use a mason's rule, how to use a joiner, the different methods for making sure something is level, plumb, and straight, and so on. And we would have races to move bricks around the shop. So that was kind of fun. In the masonry shop, we had just piles of bricks, and we had brick tongs, which allowed us to pick up, I don't know how many bricks at a time, a lot of them. And me and the other students would have contests to see who could move the most bricks the fastest. But our instructor was Lori Postoke. Hell of a guy. Love the dude. I hope I run into him someday. But he was a great teacher. He explained stuff in a way that was very easy to understand. He would give us different, projects that we needed to complete. We needed to know how to build a column or how to make an arch or something like that. So we learned all that stuff. It was really cool. And I completed the program. I was really adamant about logging my hours and stuff, and you had to have so many hours in order to get your certification. You also needed to pass all your tests. So I passed all my written tests. I logged all my hours. I completed what was supposed to be a 12-month program in about 5 months. And even then, towards the end, I was pretty much done. I was just kind of waiting around to finish out my hours, I guess. But a lot of times I would work in the classroom as a tutor for other guys in the program. A lot of guys in prison can't read. They're not very good with math. They have some problems. A lot of guys don't have a lot of education in prison, unfortunately. So I worked as a tutor for, Mr. Postoke when I could, in addition to my shop time and stuff. And I really enjoyed that. But it was hard work. It was back-breaking work, and when it was over with, I was ready to go back to doing electrical. So that's what I did. I shifted back over to electrical for a while, and after a bit, I kind of got bored with it, I guess, and I switched over to being a clerk. Now, at this point, I was doing a lot with the JCs. I was streamlining everything. My spreadsheet formulas and my programs and stuff were becoming very, very useful. And I was teaching classes in addition to working. So it made sense for me to be a clerk because I would be out in the gym and yard area where we taught our classes and where we had our office. So it would make things a lot easier. And that's what I did. I went and I became a clerk and I started doing that stuff. I don't know how long I was a clerk. It doesn't seem like it was very long. Maybe it was. Maybe it was a year or so. I don't really know. I ended up getting fired from my job as a clerk because I made a video game. And it's kind of funny because the video game wasn't playable. It wasn't, anything special. There were parts of it that worked, but it was not a fully developed video game or anything. It was mostly text-based. And I understand that video games don't seem particularly related to my job as a clerk. But I was writing programs for finances and statistics and things like that. And a script that is meant for finances and statistics can also be applied to a video game. And programming can be really boring. And sometimes I would need to test out a little snippet of code, a piece of a script or something. And I would just use it in a video game instead of using it on some program that I already have that I'm improving upon. I didn't want to mess that up, so I would take it over here and test it. And it's, it was frowned upon. But it was especially useful in stuff like menus and databases and stuff like that. You have that stuff in video games, and you have that in financial documents. It wasn't really a document, it was a program, but whatever. But I was applying what I figured out over here to my finances and stuff, what I was doing with the JCs and the gym and yard. But anyway, make a long story excruciating, it got me fired. Well, I want to say within a week, I had a job working for IT. I don't know if it was the next day. It seems like it was the next day. Maybe it wasn't, but I got a job working for IT. So I went from electrical crew, Votech, back to electrical, working as a clerk, got fired for coding essentially. And then I had a job with electronics and IT. So that was pretty cool. I didn't stick with that though. I didn't like some of the stuff that they were doing. You know, a lot of times the IT department put up security cameras and stuff, and I wouldn't do it. And that was probably going to get me written up at some point. I don't know how long I was in electronics and IT, but it didn't last for as long as my other jobs. And I ended up becoming a dog handler. I had a greyhound named Starbuck. He was old. And later on, I had a therapy dog named Nellie, who I still have. And I did that for years. Again, I don't know exactly what the time was on it, but I did that for a long time. And basically, as a dog handler, with Starbuck, it was different. I basically just watched the dog. He wasn't being adopted by anyone. You know, he couldn't be adopted by anyone. It was almost like he had PTSD. He had been at the racetrack at one point, you know, and whenever there was a loud bang, you know, like when they start a dog race, he would freak out. He would start shaking, and he couldn't be adopted. And instead of putting him down, I took care of him. And with Nellie, me and my cellmate would take her back into the infirmary and visit with the cancer patients and the guys who were on the terminal list, or the guys who had severe mental health problems. That was our job. It was really cool. And she stayed in the cell with us, and we would take her out, and we had food and stuff in the cell for her. And she had a little dog bed and some dog toys, and it was cool, you know. Eventually, I guess the last thing that I did while I was in El Dorado, I wouldn't even call it a job. It's just, it was an important part of my life. For about 3 years up until I left, I was the leader of the Thelema call-out. Someone was asking me questions. Someone knew that I studied religion, and he was asking me questions about Thelema because there was a Thelema call-out, but nobody went to it. And it was actually something that I had been invited to before I had studied. I was familiar with it. And I don't know how it happened, but I ended up the leader of the Thelema call-out. But I don't understand how the world works sometimes, but that happened. And I was the leader of that call-out for 3 years. And I was a dog handler. And after that, I ended up getting into some trouble. Well, I got my minimum, actually. I was doing good. And I got into some trouble and got rolled to max custody. But I will talk about that in a different video. You know, not a lot interesting happened during this time. I was involved with the JCs. I worked a lot. I was in college. I got a vocational certification. You know, I worked with animals. I worked in electronics. I was doing coding. But as far as prison stuff goes, not that much happened that was super interesting. You know, it's not what people make it out to be. I stayed away from a lot of drama. You know, I didn't involve myself in politics. I didn't get involved in the BS. I tried to stay on a positive kick. My time was so full of other stuff, I didn't have time for the drama and the BS and the stupid prison stuff. I just didn't. And I guess that helped me, you know, to some degree, because I imagine I would have been a lot worse off if I did get involved in all that little stuff. But yeah, anyway, I think the time frame that I covered here was about from 2009 or 2010 up to 2015. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm Eric. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I will see you all later.
Teacher!